I wanted to, as I welcome you here this morning, just to talk about the critical correlational conversation. So you may wonder, you may not have heard that term, what is the critical correlational conversation? Well, a critical correlational conversation invites reflection about everything that we do. And I think that's nothing that is more true than in the aging field. Aging brings together researchers from every dimension. And the wonderful thing about the critical correlational conversation, which actually comes from a sociologist of religion by the name of Don Browning, who I knew at the University of Chicago, it's thinking about both the personal aspects of aging and the professional aspects and our own areas, what we contribute to our corner of aging that then really resonates for the whole picture and provides a broader understanding, whether more scientifically focused, whether more humanistically focused, all of that matters and all of that enriches us in so many ways. When we talk about aging, we're talking about longevity, of course, because it's a real gift to be able to live to an old age. And with the pandemic, we've seen that many people haven't been afforded that gift. But longevity also allows us to engage in a positive form of aging. So to find out what it is that is our unique contribution and how we can achieve well-being, both for ourselves and for others, for those people who are likewise in our corner of the field, who are interested in our own research and what we're learning and what we're doing with it. So aging really it's not about having a perfect life, but the great thing is we get to learn, we get to live lives, whatever life we're given, we get a chance to learn from that. And moreover, why we're here today, we get to contribute what it is that we're learning. So this forum and others like it is just a very powerful way to offer contribution in the unique and depth areas of where we stand, where we're positioned, and where we provide the knowledge that we're able to gain. And another thing I just want to mention is that we build very heavily on the work of each other. And that's especially true in the aging field. And that's why I love participating in forums like this, because I learned so much and it really incites new knowledge and new ways, new perspectives, new ways about thinking, sometimes even about older issues. So we have a great lineup for you this morning. We have a number of speakers and I'll take a few moments to introduce each one. But let me just add, Christina, did you want to say a few words before I do that?
No, everybody hears far too much from me, so. I'm hopefully in listening mode today because I'm really interested and excited by the program, and perhaps just to blow our own trumpet a little bit as a group of researchers. I think I said this before to colleagues, that the breadth of the research that's on display this morning shows that we are truly an interdisciplinary group with strengths across the university and all of the colleges. And I think that's something to be extraordinarily proud of and to build on. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to hear from everybody today, and I have a great curiosity and interest in what everyone has to say. Our first speaker this morning is Professor Dorothy Yen, and her topic is, are you taking a balanced approach to healthy aging? Dorothy Yen is a professor in marketing at the Brunel Business School, Brunel University, London. Dorothy takes on a consumer-centric approach to understand older people as consumers, focusing on their behavior and practices. So Dorothy, take it away.
Thank you, Holly. I don't know if everybody can see the PowerPoint slides.
Yes, we can see them.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so thank you very much for having me here today. And I will be talking about a balanced approach to healthy aging. So I'm based in the business school, and this is my contact email address. So if people have anything that you wish to discuss after my presentation, please feel free to email me. Okay, so this is actually one of the research projects that we did. At the time, we were very interested in to find out that what older people do to maintain healthy aging. What do they practice on a daily basis so that they can say that they are doing something towards their healthy aging status. So then we thought about the balance theory. The balance theory is basically saying that it is a balance between body, mind, and spirit. It is the foundation in managing health and healing across various cultures. So while we were conducting our interviews with the older adults in the Northwest London area, we were very much focusing on thinking and contemplating the practice and then how we could categorize them, whether they are under body, whether they are under mind, or whether they are under soul. Okay, the reason why we're taking this approach to rather than telling people, rather than talking to old people and telling them how they should be practicing healthy aging, we thought it's a lot more meaningful to ask the older people, well, because I'm in marketing field, so I would phrase them and we would classify them as aging consumers. What do they do? Because we feel that from the consumer-centered approach, we get to understand their behavior and we get to understand the barriers and the enablers about their behaviors better. So here is our findings. It was really interesting talking to older people. One of our researcher, she self-classified herself as one of the aging consumers, and then she conducted all the interviews using snowball sampling with the 18 older adults. And this is what we found. There are three key areas, which is about body, mind, and soul. And in terms of what they do, when we look in further, when we talk about a healthy body, older people talks about having a sensible diet and also nutritious food, doing regular exercise, and also practice body love, pampering themselves, putting lotion, putting cream on their skins. And then when we look at mind, what older people do is they keep an active mind. So some of them saying they're doing their math clubs, and some of them telling us that they are very good players of online Sudoku games and Scrabbles. They do a lot of things to keep themselves engaged. And then so it's basically saying that you are stay connected. You are feeling this emotional support with the loved ones, which is not just family or friends, but also with your pet. So some of our participants told us that when they are walking their dogs, they get to connect it with fellow dog owners, and also they feel this love and trust relationship with their pet. Okay. But the interesting things that we would like to draw for your attention is that the choice in terms of which practice that one is engaging is often not rational, but very random. It's often affected by life choices and also life transforming events, and also very much confined and defined by the environment. Okay, so give you an example. One of the participants mentioned that they live close by to the park, so it's easy to go for a walk to the park. But going for a walk in the park is not always the choice by all, because some of them feel that even though they wanted to engage in daily exercise, but it's difficult to go for a walk to the park because they live further away from the green. So instead, they would walk along their compounds, and that counts as an exercise as well. And this is what we meant, that the choice is not always as rational as thought through, but often defined and confined by the environment. Okay, so now this is the key thing in terms of what is really a balanced approach. We felt that by looking at all the participants and analyze their choice in relation to how they classify themselves, whether they feel they are aging healthily or not, we realized that we could kind of put them into this interlinked circle. And then the key thing is that while we are all practicing healthy aging in our own ways, the most important thing is making sure that you are doing something that's tapping into the three areas at the same time. It doesn't have to be so for example, okay, in the middle we have working. Working is important because working means that you are actually going to work and you're going back from work, and often working means that you need to use your mind and you are engaging and you are also connecting with colleagues because you work with people together. So we classify working as one of the healthy aging practice that's actually tapping into the three elements at the same time. Volunteering is also another one, because while you are volunteering to work, for example, in the charity shop, you are actually moving about using your body, and you are talking to people, serving the customers and helping others. And also it's making you feel it's giving you a chance to think and to engage. So it's tapping into the three. Okay, but it's not saying that we all have to do working, to do volunteering, or to participate in singing group or ballroom dancing. Hence, we are having a balanced approach. The key thing about this framework is you could choose whatever practice you would like to do, but just make sure that you are tapping into body, mind, and soul at the same time. So you're not just focusing on doing one thing and ignoring the others. Okay, because through our interview, we did notice that there are a couple of participants, because of their mobility issues, they're very much staying at home and focusing on practicing their mind. But because they are not going out and doing the regular walking about, they are actually suffering from deteriorating health, and they feel they are not aging as well as they could have been. Okay, so this is my very brief presentation of our research finding. So I guess the key thing is do whatever you do, but just remind yourself and ask yourself whether whatever aging practice you do, tapping into the three elements at the same time. Right, so I'm ready to take questions now. Thank you.
Any brief questions for Dorothy? Dorothy, that was a fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, I have one question, an interesting observation. Thanks, Dorothy. That's a very good presentation. I think it's the issue to do with rationality. And obviously, as an economist, I hope you appreciate why I'm interested about this. Now, to me, if I got the understanding well, I thought they were rational decision makers because they weighed their constraints in terms of the environment and budget constraints in making decisions that to exercise. So I was quite intrigued, why you considered it not to be rational.
Okay, so give you an example. Well, when we talk about human behavior, often behaviors are defined by both by rational thinking, so cognitive choice, as well as emotional state. So what we do are often affected by how we feel at the time. Okay, so it's not just rational choice. Often, for example, one of the participants says, oh, I used to go to the singing group. I used to really enjoyed it, but because but I don't feel like it, and my friend is not going there anymore, so I just don't want to go anymore. It's not really a rational choice in terms of giving up the practice, but it's because because it's that the friend is not going, and she lost the motivation, hence it's not going. Yeah.
Okay, so it was emotive versus rationality in marketing.
Yeah.
Okay, I got that. Okay, thank you.
It's all right. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I see we have a question also from Joanna, but Joanna, would you mind holding your question until we'll have about half an hour at the end of all the presentations. Thank you. So let's go on to the next presentation. And Dorothy, if you can stop your screen sharing.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, how do I do that?
There, I think you did it.
Yeah,
Great.
okay, great.
Okay, next we have Dr. Hannah Lowe, and her presentation title is "If You Can't Win It Straight, Win It Crooked: Post-War Chinese Caribbean Migrants Aging in the UK." Hannah Lowe is a poet, memoirist, and critic. Her latest poetry collection, The Kids, won the Costa Book Award of the year for 2021. So without further ado, Hannah, tell us about your work.
Morning, everyone. Can you all hear me fine? I hope so. Yeah, sorry, but the title on my slide is slightly different from the title that you read out, but I'm in the creative writing department, so it's a bit left field, my coming into this research forum, but as Christina said, hopefully it says something about interdisciplinarity. And I think my work today has an intergenerational focus. So I'll talk, and it's quite subjective, arts-based practice, but I'll talk about the quotation in the title. It's something that my father would say about his line of work. So my dad was Jamaican, he was Afro-Chinese, and he was he might call himself a professional gambler, but he was actually what they call a card sharp or a card mechanic, which means that he didn't always play it straight. So if you can't win it straight, win it crooked. And I have mainly written about his life. And I should say my father passed away in 2002, but I do have a kind of new research subject still living, and I'll kind of move to talking about him shortly. So I'll read you a poem from my first collection, Chick, which is on the screen. Hopefully it's going to let me move slides. And the poem kind of speaks to the whole book, Chick, from 2013, is about my memories of my dad's work, which as a child, I did not fully understand. I didn't really know what he did. I used to say to kids at school that he was a night worker, whatever that meant. 5 ways to load a dice. Oh, I should say the poem was addressed to my father. So when I mention his the father in the poem, it's my Chinese grandfather, who was also a gambler. 5 ways to load a dice. Like the yellowed cubes of knuckle bone they plucked from slag and ashes at Pompeii, speared with pig bristle or flint to slow the roll. Or like your father in the rattling alleys of Shanghai, who smelt his sweat among the shooters, crouched like toads around the felt, who whispered luck into his fist to warm the wax he'd painted on. These ways are old. Now I read that juice joints play electric dice, magnetic wood lice curled inside, or tappers, hollow chambers filled with mercury that slips from side to side. In our house, dice the green of emeralds or ruby red like cola cubes were hidden in a biscuit tin behind the scarves and parkas in the cupboard in the hall. There were rooms we didn't go in, but I saw you once, the door ajar, the curtains drawn against the sun. You were huddled like a scholar in the lamplight, goggles and a dentist drill, a pan of smoking lead, that smell. So the poem I've just read, it speaks to like what creative writers do, which is draw on all kinds of, I suppose, research methodologies, one of which is mining or honing our own memories, as I'm doing in this poem, remembering seeing my dad loading dice, but not knowing what he was doing. And then kind of research around how other people have loaded dice historically and in the more recent contemporary times. So this kind of interest in my father's story has spilled out across a number of books. Chick, I mentioned, that's my dad there on the a roof in Hampstead in 1954, or Monde, which is about the ship that he came on in 1947 from Jamaica to Britain. Chan, which is very much about the life of his cousin, who was a jazz saxophonist, Joe Harriet, and Long Time No See, which is a kind of merging in prose of all those stories. And I should say that in that way, my work kind of speaks to the interest in the narratives of Windrush, which is really a kind of big historical moment in 1998. And I think one of the reasons that 1998, the anniversary of the Windrush's arrival, was so important was not least because that was the date that the ship had arrived 50 years previously, but also because of the advancing ages of that generation of migrants and the sense that their stories would be lost if they were not captured in that moment. And so books like this one, I don't know if anyone is familiar with this book, Windrush, The Irresistible Rise of Multiracial Britain, is a collection of oral testimonies that was written in 1998, collecting the stories of that migrant generation. So I'm going to skip over the next two slides. I can come back and talk about research methodology if anyone's interested later, but that's my grandmother, I should say, my Jamaican grandmother. This year, I had this message on Instagram, and I should say that my dad was known by a number of gambling monikers. Chick was one of them, Chin was another, and his real name was Ralph. So this was a message that I got from someone called James Wan, who is now 81, living in Hebden Bridge. And he's speaking about meeting my father. I met Chin, Lowe, Ralph, Chick, that's all some of his names, 1959 at a gambling joint in Brixton. I was a 19-year up and coming professional gambler. This was the meeting of master and student. I also want to congratulate you for your loving tribute to your dad by immortalizing in your art. Your project is indeed an enormous contribution to our struggle, the marginalized, colonized, windrushed, and so on. And then I look forward to having an opportunity. And you can see me writing back saying, wow, dear James, thank you so much. I had no idea. I mean, I did know of this man, but I had no idea that he was still alive. And so this has kind of spurred me on. I'm in the very initial stages of a new writing project, which is about the life of James Wan, this associate of my father, who is also Chinese-Jamaican, Afro-Chinese from Jamaica. And I've been spending time with James over the last 6 months. And here are some of the things that he has. I've just picked out a few little quotations from some of the things that James has told me over the last 6 months or so. So he's talking about gambling in, sorry, I'm gonna go back one. In 1962, and he says, I was 23, so I was still a mug, but I thought I was a wide boy in a general sense, not just gambling. I was shrewd in gambling. I ran the biggest dice game in London at 22-year-old. I was at Columbus in Brixton, back of Brixton Market, in a little back street next to Billy Howard, who was one of Southwest London gangsters. So this is just the kind of testimony that you kind of very rarely hear, which can also kind of be historically kind of validated in some way, in the sense that Billy Howard was a big gangster back in those days, notorious in fact. But it's also this like testifying to like migrant lives in London and how young men and maybe women were surviving at that time. I'll read you another quote. This is about Brixton. Every weekend now, I would pass by the house in Summer Leighton Road, where there were plenty of gambling action among the hustlers. And I would go on to the house in Brixton where Barabbas, that was the guy I went to Birmingham with, Judas, I changed his name, made a pretty good income gambling with working men who gathered there. And I should say that there's an absence of information about these type of histories, the histories of like subterranean, semi-legal activity among British people and also migrant communities. And so James's testimony is really like, it's kind of like gold dust in some ways for a writer, but also it testifies to the aging migrants' need to tell their life story, I suppose. And so I'll read one more quote and then just some summary points. So this is him and I in conversation, and he says, I don't know what question I've asked him, but he says, absolutely. Can you imagine what I would have been like if I hadn't traveled? Or put it this way, read and traveled, because books and traveling, that's where my education has come from. And my starting point for education was when I was jailed. I got 3 years in jail for possession of weed. I didn't sell weed and the weed wasn't mine. And I say, was that in Jamaica? And he says, no, Chinese don't go to prison in Jamaica, in the north of England. And even Ralph, that's my dad, said to me, why did they lock you up? He should know about these people. He spent his life, he was one of them. But they were more using him because they could get Chin to make a dice or fix some cards or something. He would prefer they get some money, and he doesn't get any of it. We're exploited as well. So what James's quotation is speaking to then is, on one hand, the elevated social status of the Chinese in Jamaica, in colonial Jamaica, and also the exploitation of, say, himself and perhaps my father by white working class gangsters in London in the 1960s and 70s, because these two men knew how to load dice and fix cards, and they were paid to do so, but not paid anywhere near as much as the winnings that they would take. So I know this is quite a lot, but I'm just going to finish off with like just a couple of summary points. James Wan's voice is unique and in need of recording because it testifies to the intersectionality of feudal Chinese social organisation and British colonialism in the Caribbean. This is not the 1930s and 40s. The complex family dynamics and sexual politics of pre-independence Jamaica, as in the relationships that happened often between Chinese men and Afro-Caribbean women, and the role of gambling in post-war migrant lives in Britain's subterranean underworld of gaming and card sharping. And as I continue in this project, I'm going to be doing further research on the intersections of aging, migration and ethnicity, the scholarship that exists on the history of gambling in the UK. It's got a wide body of scholarship. The history of card sharping in Britain, which is there is not much history at all of this kind of illegal, unorthodox activity, and also kind of pushing at the idea of the in the blood stereotype of Chinese gambling, and countering that with the idea that gambling was actually a really financially productive alternative to the de-skilling of Caribbean migrants in the orthodox labour market in the years post Windrush. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Wow, Hannah, that was an amazing presentation. It just, your poetry is so evocative, and the breadth and the intergenerational connections hand to hand in the migrants, that's really fantastic. Maybe we have time for one short question.
Well, interesting comments in the chat.
Yeah, there's a number of comments. Well,
Yeah.
Given that, I think what we'll do is we'll go on, and then people are welcome to come back to you later, but that was just fantastic and such a rich presentation. Thank you. So our next speaker is Professor Hua Dong, and Hua Dong is going to speak about mental health adoption among older adults. She is professor and head of Brunel Design School. She leads the Inclusive Design Research Group and takes a human-centered approach to design accessible and desirable products and systems. So Hua Dong, please take it away.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Here we go. There.
Okay,
We
good.
can see them.
So my talk is actually Mhealth adoption among older adults. This is the research I collaborate with Dr. Pen Jing from Nanjing Technology University. Okay. Firstly, let me give you the definition of what we mean by Mhealth. This is about the use of mobile or wireless technologies for public health. It's part of the term e-health, or nowadays, which is called digital health, which is broader. Okay, we conducted 2 studies pre-COVID-19 in East London and Nanjing. In each place, we had participants, 30 volunteers, aged 50 to 70. And we used questionnaires and interviews. And also in London, we also organized Mhealth trial workshop. So the study in London took place before the study in Nanjing. In London, now I'm going to report the findings. I'm going to color code the 2 studies. So black text is the studies in London, and brown is the studies in Nanjing. So in London, we had 80% of the participants who all had smart mobile devices, and 4 of them, 13%, had used health apps. Those icons are what they used. In Nanjing, actually 100% participants had smartphones, and 50% of them had used Mhealth apps. Those icons shows what they have used. Okay, in terms of perceptions of Mhealth, participants from both places, they use Mhealth for seeking information on health issues, making appointment or contact doctors, exercise tracking, and health management. Because there are more participants in Nanjing who used Mhealth apps, so they also mentioned other functions which they find useful, like health monitoring, emergency calls, self-assessment and self-diagnosis, and also access to health records or examination reports, etc. I'm going to talk about 6 aspects of the perceived usefulness to the participants on Mhealth. One is compatibility with their lifestyle. You can see the quotes, although the studies took place in different time, different location, they are quite similar. Some of the results are quite similar. For example, from London, it is good service, but not necessary to me. I'm satisfied with life without it. So in Nanjing, the participants said, for people at my age, we really would like to live as we want. And I usually print my health records and put them in order. I don't want to use an app for that. Okay, the second one is Mhealth needs to offer obvious advantage. So although you have communication with a doctor online, he or she still always suggests you to go to the GP.
I was moving towards you.
I still have to go to hospital. I talked with the doctor online, after I talked with a doctor online, so why bother? Or sometimes you can find the information on the package. The third is about information reliability. So in London, the participants said it is hard to calculate the calories or sugar in an accurate way. In Nanjing, the participants said the measurement inaccurate. If it's not accurate, it's totally useless. Or the both, in London says, I feel more comfortable to talk with a doctor face to face. Nanjing, I don't believe in apps. I think doctors are more reliable. And they are both worried about additional cost. If they are free, they tend to use them. If not free, they're worried. And also the concern with efforts to learn. So calling the GP is easy. Using the app for it may make it more complicated. Or in Nanjing, going to hospital is much easier than communicating with a doctor by using the app, which I need to pay much attention to learn. Finally, privacy concerns. I don't want my information to be seen by others. What if I lose my phone? Or who will see the information I uploaded? Where do my data go? So these are the concerns of the perceived usefulness. In terms of perceived ease of use, both participants in London and Nanjing mentioned similar items like clarity of the language, text size, knowing where to press, etc., although the order slightly differed. In Nanjing, participants also complained there are too many pop-up ads from their Mhealth apps. In terms of perceived behavior control, again, the findings are similar. So the top three are generational gap, which means having difficulty to understand the new terms generated by the younger generation, such like manual navigation, etc. And their visual impairments and decline in memory. Although in China, it seems a decline in movement is ranked higher than the decline in ability to understand written or spoken languages. We identified some of the key aspects of processes of Mhealth adoption among older people. I'm going to talk about 4 aspects: barriers, triggers, motivation, and suggestions. So based on the workshop in East London, we identified these barriers. From the outside is access to the device, and then connection to internet, downloading, installing. Every step before sustained use actually present a barrier. And based on the studies in China, we find a lot of old people, they were triggered to use Mhealth apps, mainly by external triggers. For example, they were given a present from their children, which already has Mhealth apps installed. So actually 9 out of 15 got the app as a present. Very few, only 3, that is 1/5 of those who use Mhealth got the knowledge before they use the apps. So there are 3 types of intrinsic motivation, which is illustrated on the right using this pyramid. So for Chinese participants in Nanjing, they are really concerned with 3 aspects. One is to use Mhealth for keeping healthy and independent. And that is for themselves, and then is for them to be part of the social groups, so enhancing the social belongings. For example, all their colleagues use an app, and so we can see who works the most. It is very convenient to make appointments with doctors online. Now young people all use it, and I have to keep up with the trend. And finally, I think this is quite unique for the Chinese participants. They also use Mhealth to take care of their loved ones. For example, the quotes, young people nowadays are facing great pressure and have no time to take care of themselves. When I see health-related information, I will send them to my daughter to make her pay more attention to her health. And I go to the hospital directly when I feel sick. I use this app was mainly for my friends and relatives. When they are sick and I cannot go to the hospital for them, I will search the symptoms to find out what the problem is and what to pay attention to. If it's a serious disease, I will urge them to go to hospital as soon as possible. And there's another intrinsic motivation, which is about saving time and efforts. This was mentioned by people who already use Mhealth apps. So making appointments online is very convenient. I don't need to queue at the hospital anymore. I can check my health report by the app. If everything is fine, I don't need to go to hospital just for fetching the report. There's some extrinsic motivation. For example, one is the rich and diverse health information they get from these apps. And the other is additional rewards. So here you see the ranking of everyone. I keep myself in the top 3 every day. There are reward points for logging in every day, and I can use the points to contact the doctor for free. So some suggestions from the participants in Nanjing, they wanted accessible help. I don't know how to set it up. The wristband was bought by my son and he set it up for me. He also installed the software. I can use it directly when I got it. It would be better if someone of the company can help me anytime I need. Okay, there are some implications for design based on these studies. We have compiled a list of suggestions for designers when they design Mhealth apps. So we talked about these aspects: suitable information channel, various behavior triggers, obvious benefits, and low cost. So if you would like to know more, we have published 2 papers in 2022. You can find more information from there. Thank you very much.
Wow. Professor Hua, that is so amazing. Such a practical study of something that we're all going to be using more, which are the mobile health apps. And I actually have a question, but maybe I'll save that to later, which has to do with your 2 samples and the greater use of the apps in Nanjing. And I did wonder whether it was a time issue, because you said the London study was done first. But let me just ask if we have a single question from somebody else. Okay, I don't know if you want to respond quickly to my question, or should we just go?
Yeah, the London study was conducted earlier, but even my guess is, even if it was conducted at the same time, it's likely those who had used Mhealth is going to be fewer than those in China, because generally Chinese old people have a more positive attitudes towards using smart mobile devices, and often they were given the devices by their children, and people do pay a lot of attention on health. And although they express the concerns of privacy risks, in general, they seems to be less bothered than the British old people or general British population. So that is my guess. And the study in London, we had 4 people out of 30 who had ever used Mhealth, and we had a workshop. We selected 10 Mhealth apps. We offered to install them to their mobile phones. Only a few numbers who actually tried, and many of them in the trial stage, even everything is supported, they still were very worried about using them. They don't seem to see the benefits of using those.
Wow. Well, thank you. I think we have a lot to learn from your study about how to reward older people for using apps and encourage them through, maybe likewise through family associations or others. So I'm looking forward to reading your articles. Okay, let's turn to our next speaker, who is Dr. Amy Prescott. Her talk will be Understanding the Experiences of British Nuclear Test Veterans. Amy Prescott is a lecturer in sport, exercise, and health from Brunel University, London. She has recently completed her PhD and is focused on using creative methods to bring hidden stories of marginalized communities to the foreground. Thank you, Amy.
Hello, thank you. I just get my screen up and hope that it works.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's good.
Cool. Okay. So hello, thank you for my introduction. So yeah, I'm going to try and whiz through basically a framework that I developed when I was doing my PhD to undertake some narrative analysis, which would then lead me to doing some creative nonfiction for my representation of my findings. So yeah, essentially it's kind of telling the stories of this marginalised community, which was the British nuclear test veterans. So just to give you a bit of background on the study, I just whizzed through it. So between 1952 to 1958, the UK conducted 21 atmospheric nuclear tests in Australia and the South Pacific. And this had involved around 22,000 individuals, which were both servicemen and regulars. And the health effects of radiation from those tests have dominated the discourse, but there's not really any sort of emphasis at the moment on their kind of health and well-being from a qualitative perspective. So that was where I came in. And so the aim of the study was to kind of understand how health and well-being, leisure, community activities came to improve their health and well-being. And so it was kind of trying to understand the complexities of their identity as a group, because there was no research on them before, to critically explore their health and well-being issues, and then to identify and analyze what types of activities that they were involved in, why they were involved in. And so I recruited a total of 29 individuals, had 2 rounds of interviews. The first one was done on the phone, and they were unstructured, and we just had a really good conversation, sometimes for about 2-3 hours. And that just really highlighted the things that were important to them. And then the second round of interviews were done face-to-face, and that was pre-COVID, which was good. And so this meant I could go into their homes and we could have a really good conversation. And so that was more structured because it was aimed at kind of addressing the things they spoke about in their first round of interviews. And so in order to analyze the second round of interviews, I used narrative analysis, but there wasn't a key framework that I could use that addressed the issues of kind of bringing their stories to light in a way that kind of didn't put me at the forefront. So I wanted it to be about them. So this was my framework that I came up with. So there's a few steps. I'm just going to whiz through them and hopefully you'll be able to kind of keep up with me. So the first one was the life history scrutiny. Sorry, no, it wasn't. It was the immersion. So that kind of underpins everything, and it means becoming immersed in the worlds of the participants. And this was critical in order to understand and connect with them. And that was basically listening, re-listening, and going through the transcripts all the time, and just really getting to grips with who these people were. The second point was the life history scrutiny, identifying the key stories within the transcripts. And so that kind of brought to life the big stories, the small stories, their shared experiences, and their exceptional life events. And so I would color code them and kind of try and see where those key themes came out. So this was kind of a really underpinning point of the framework. The next thing to do was to then create a temporal framework in which I could put those events in a chronological order. And so I would have life before the tests, life during the tests, life after the tests, and then, you know, split them up with childhood, joining the forces, meeting their partner, starting a family, and just seeing how all of those things sit within somebody's story. The next point was a core story creation. And so every participant that I had interviewed had this core story. And it meant really kind of removing my own comments, my questions, my sentence fillers, their sentence fillers, and things that were kind of just repeated or a bit unnecessary to what we were talking about. And so each story then became, you know, if you have 20 pages of transcript, it became like a 4-page story. And it was like a monologue of that person telling me a chronological story, which we don't do in real life. We don't say from beginning to end. And so it was a real good way of kind of setting a bit of a foundation for what I was going to do next. So then I'd have an implotted whole narrative, and this was read for flow, was read for character creation, and it was a focus on a specific life event. And by the end, I had 19 narratives. Some were shorter than others, and some were also structured to be like a husband and wife conversation, because at times I'd had the husband and wife involved in that interview. And so rather than just one person, it was a real good, you know, back and forward between the two of them. So then my next thing to do was to kind of explore how I was going to represent the finding, and that was done using creative nonfiction. And so this is a really interesting method that I've just completely fallen in love with, and it's basically creating a story where it's grounded within the data, but I'm using fictitious conventions. I'm setting the scene. You know, I'm using narration in the first or third person, it's using imagery, and it's also this character amalgamation to represent all of those people within one story. So I reread the story again and again, and I would highlight them using key codes. And I would have all of this written down. I'm a very much writing and visual person. I can't really use software for this. And so I would try and link everyone together, because that was going to be how I would put all of these characters in one setting. And so I had this map that I was then going to create. And it was, as you can see, it might seem a bit messy, but I loved it at the time. And I could put in quotes from each theme that I was going to address. And so from this, I created 3 creative nonfiction stories that basically addressed each of these. So it was, you know, coming back to those research objectives, identifying, you know, what it means to be a test veteran or part of that community, understanding any health and wellbeing issues, and also the activities that they were involved in. And so in order to address the second part of that framework, I then encapsulated all the stories and character amalgamation. So for example, for one story, I have about 8 veterans who were national servicemen, and the others were regulars. They'd signed up because they wanted to. And so I had to kind of try and put all those different experiences together and just have 2 characters to represent all of them. So I'd set the scene, I'd create a storyboard, and I'd go through, you know, what this is going to look like based on all of those plotted narratives that I created. And usually I'd have kind of like 9 key points within each story in order to make sure it flowed nicely and had, you know, that whole kind of point of a story. And then finally, I would use realistic details. So if you see on the left, that was the narrative that I'd had, and each one was addressed within that. So there was a lot of information that went into 1 page of story, and everyone kind of made sure that they had a bit of a role within that. And so as an example, this is taken from one of my creative nonfiction stories, and this is what I'll end on before questions. Dr. Green went back to his computer screen. Muriel could hear the wheel of the mouse as he scrolled. Do you have a routine? Regular things that fill the week up? She'd always been a stickler for routine, to-do lists and planning. Well, yes, doctor, I do as it happens. Monday is washing day. Tuesday, I try to hoover upstairs and downstairs. And Wednesday, my daughter takes me shopping. Every Sunday, I buy a newspaper and call my brother for a catch-up. When Kevin was alive, we would always have a roast dinner on a Sunday. It used to drive my daughter mad. Muriel smiled fondly. Always roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. Routine is important, but I miss the little things like that. Dr. Green sat back on his chair. Do you still have a roast on a Sunday? She twisted her wedding ring. Sometimes my daughter has me over for Sunday lunch, but there's no point making all of that if it's just for me. So that was just, you know, a way of highlighting kind of loss and loneliness, routine, you know, the importance of that for health and well-being. And so quite nicely, these stories now are going to be recorded as radio dramas in a few weeks. I've got some lovely participants who are going to do some reading for me. And that's just a good way to disseminate all of those findings into the wider atmosphere, and that people can have access to them. And yeah, so that's my presentation. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask them.
Amy, that was fantastic. You can't see me smiling because my camera doesn't work, but I love the way you opened up your methods to share with us how you put together this idea of creative nonfiction stories. And I think we have time for one question now and possibly more later. Are there any questions from the audience?
Amy, is it still on for the 25th of May?
Yes, still is, yeah.
Okay, we'll be there.
Thank you.
Can we get in hard copy due to the that we discussed earlier?
Amy, I wanted to ask, using this creative nonfiction methodology, how much is still true? Is that still 100% true, or you've already, by putting different characters together, I just wanted to know, you know, to what extent.
You do move it. Not the camera.
What are you talking?
You're showing the camera on the phone.
Did you mean like how much of it is true using the, yeah. So
Yes.
basically the only thing that's not true is where the stories are. So the first one's set within a cafe, the second one is set within a GP surgery, and the third one is set within a community hall. The conversation, 99% of that has come from the interview transcripts. And then the characters, as I say, are just kind of, they are grouped together accordingly. So the first way, like I said, was by whether they had signed up because they wanted to join the forces of, you know, their own free will, or they were national servicemen. The other way was if they were widows or widowers. And then the other side of that had partners that were still living. And then the third way was whether they engaged in life, what we called life activities. So things like if they were gym members, if they did yoga, if they went swimming, if they sang part of a church and so on. Those who actively weren't interested in that, or if they were doing things that are kind of less covered, that are sedentary activities. So like because of their, you know, they couldn't really function like they wanted to. So one of them had lost the ability to walk, for example. It had that focus shifted to like jigsaw puzzles, reading, watching the TV, which isn't really, there's not much about that in the literature that I could find. And so it was a good way to highlight that actually there are other things that you can do which are good for your well-being, just because you can't move physically. So yeah, kind of, I guess, having a bit of that critique of the active aging agenda and stuff like that. So that was the, I know I've gone on a bit, but yeah, most of it was true. I would say 99% of that was true. It wasn't lost.
Thank you, Amy. And wow, that was a great question for Amy to further explicate her work. So thank you. On that note, let's turn to Joe Holmberg-Hansson, who will be talking about understanding aging brains. Joe Holmberg-Hansson is a doctoral researcher in the Department of Life Sciences, and she has a background in developmental and cross-cultural psychology. Joe, welcome.
Thank you so much, Holly, for that nice introduction. I'm going to talk to you today about a study that is actually undergoing, so it's not done. We are just about to start collecting data. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll start by sharing my screen. And you should be able to see my screen now, I hope. I'm just gonna wait until this, sorry. No, it doesn't want to. There we go. So I'm going to talk to you about an ED study that I'm doing. I'm working interdisciplinary using both psychology methods and deep learning methods together with a colleague. And we're trying to understand the aging brain. This is actually an area that I've kind of slipped into. My research is looking at depression and resilience in different culture group and different age groups. So basically I've been looking at comparing immigrants to non-immigrants, and I've done that from the age, from teenagers, young adults, and then we slowly and steadily I moved into older age, and now I'm also looking into senior citizens with this study that we have, which is my last study within my PhD. So why do we look at depression? We know that WHO now deems depression to be the most debilitating illness in the world. So 280 million people suffer from major depressive disorder in the world. This is what we believe the tip of the iceberg, because depression isn't always defined in different cultures as how we define it in the industrial part of the world. It's just increasing epidemically since before COVID. The rates here in UK have doubled. So now 1 out of 5 adults will be suffering from depression throughout the lifespan. We know that there are certain age groups that are more affected. So girls between 20 and 35 are much, or women, sorry, are much more at risk of developing depression, and also people 55 and above are at 50% risk of having depression. So there's also another side to the story. It's very difficult to get help with depression at the moment. Here specifically, I'm now talking about the UK, but that's same when we look at other countries also. So there's a long waiting list. If you look online, you will see up to 18 months within the NHS. That is actually a positive number. I've heard people waiting 3 years and longer to get access to help. And if you don't have a private insurance, it can be extremely costly. And this in itself may trigger hopelessness, which may make the depression symptoms much more severe. So that's why I find it to be paramount to do research how to fix this, because what we know, this is such an increasing problem, yet the way of helping or efficient treatment method, it is still elusive. So we have to have a different approach. So why I'm looking at resilience, which is a potent antidote to depression. And resilience, maybe you are aware of what that is, but basically an individual's ability to thrive in the face of adversity, to bounce back, and to perhaps also become stronger after adversity. And if you have that ability, whether it's a trait or a state that's been discussed throughout literature, in my research, and I've found that it's actually a combination, it seems as if. So you can actually train this, you can actually learn this, which is a very big help. So I'm looking at the screen. So I will tell you a little bit about the research study. I'm looking at 2 populations, one which are adults, 25 to 40, and they are also going to be divided into migrants and non-migrants. And then the second a group of people aged, I think around 65 to 80 we have recruited now. Maybe some are a little bit younger there, so go into from 55. And firstly, we want to establish self-reported levels of depression. So you use self-reported questionnaires. That's what's used within healthcare systems when you are diagnosed with depression. And then we are going to move on to use neural signatures of resilience. We use EEG, which is more an objective perhaps you can say objective measure, but when you record the brain signals. And we want to compare the self-report measure against the more objective measures from the EEG and see how the discrepancy, whether there is anything. There is some research done on this already, like 20 years ago, but nothing really came out of that, and it wasn't nothing really built on that, I would say. And to my knowledge, I'm in a group now which may correct me if I'm wrong, but with using resilience, I haven't found any research looking at that at all. So just to put you back a bit here then. So so this was what I was talking about earlier, whether this is a trait or a state, it's important. And also we know that resilience and depression may differ when it comes to both populations, different between cultures, age group, and so forth. So when we look at the study that we are looking at the moment, we are, like I said, collecting both self-report measures and objective measures. If it's not really correct to say that EEG is more objective than self-reported, I would say it's not 100% objective anyway. We will also be looking at two other factors, which is equanimity and psychopathy. It's just interesting factors that we have found to maybe be explaining the quite complex construct of resilience. So what are we going to do? So we will have this first self-report questionnaire that we will be, we have recruited 300 participants, and they will just answer several questionnaires on depression and resilience in these different age groups. And there we will definitely have divide the two groups. Age group will also be further divided into people with migrant background and people with British background in this case. And then we will have a second study, which is the EEG study, where 30 people have been recruited for that. And they have also been part of the self-report study, study 1. And we will use EEG in this manner. So I will just going to show you the recording here. So what we will do is that we will present the participants with resilience enhancing images, and then you do a resting state, and then you present them resilience hampering images, which could evoke distress, and then to see how quickly you bounce back from that. That's a measure of resilience. We show resilience enhancing images again. We have resting states in between, and we capture the brain signals throughout this whole recording. And we would be very interested to see how much this explained resilience in the brain, and whether it differs between younger people, younger individuals, and older, and whether it also can differ between different cultures, and again how much they correlate between what the participant themselves have self-reported and how much what we capture when we collect the EEG data. So like I mentioned earlier, we take an interdisciplinary approach to this research. So I have classical psychological statistical tools that I use also, and also what we use within neuroscience. But then we add computer science methods, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and also deep learning, which is part of artificial intelligence, which means that we can have much more individualized findings rather than the aggregated findings that you use when you use classical statistical methods. I've listed a long list of analysis that we're going to do. I won't go through them right now. We will do a bunch of study of analysis, as you can see we have planned. We will compare between groups, and we'll also look for biomarkers, that is signals that more clearly point out to the different evoked stimuli that we are using, such as stimuli for depression, stimuli for resilience. And then when you use EEG data, this is just part of the research I've been part of before. How we clean data within EEG, and this is basically what you do, because there is a lot of artifacts. The problem with EEG is that there's a lot of noise in those signals, eye blinks, for example, and other things. So we clean data in this manner, and then the image to the right is an illustration of the deep network that we'll use to distract the critical information from the data. And this was it for me. I hope to come back maybe if I'm welcome or in some other forum to disseminate the results of this study. But for now, this is as far as we have gotten. We will soon start to collect the data. So thank you very much for your attention, and sorry about the screen situation.
Oh, don't worry, we all have screen situations too.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That sounds like a really excellent study, and I'm so excited to hear the results of what you come up with later. Does anyone have a question for Joe before we move on?
Yeah, Michael seem to have a question.
Looks like Michael's got an excuse me. Looks like Michael's got a question, or has got a hand up.
Well, yes, it's not so much a question, it's a question and a comment actually, but it relates to the whole series of talks we've heard this morning, not just to this last one.
Well, there is one more talk, yeah. So maybe if you could hold on to that thought.
Yes, of course I will.
Give that to us at the end.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And our next and last presenter, but not least, is Dr. Ellie Reed. And she will be talking about knitting, memories, and connections. Ellie Reed is a lecturer in English at Brunel, and her research focuses on domestic women's magazines from the first half of the 20th century. How interesting. So Ellie, tell us about your work.
Hello. Hi, just sharing my screen. Yes, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about what I'm doing. I'm very, very excited to be sharing my idea for a project with you. So yeah, just quickly, yes, I'm Ellie, and I'm in the English department at Brunel, and I research domestic magazines from the 1900s to the 1950s. So my kind of cutoff point is 1960. I have a book about Women's Weekly coming out hopefully soon, but my kind of current research focuses on the role and the status of knitting in a much wider range of titles. As you'll be able to see from the images of the magazine front covers on the slides I'm going to show you, knitting was a key selling point for many domestic publications from this period. From about 1900 to onwards, knitting rose in popularity. It sort of exploded in popularity from the kind of 1920s, 30s onwards. And knitting and the domestic magazines are really kind of driving this by advertising patterns, using patterns as incentives for readers to buy them, but also by advertising the exciting new yarns and needles and other materials that were increasingly coming on the market. So yeah, that's what I'm looking at the moment. And my aim in this is to kind of learn a bit more about women's domestic leisure practices, which are a neglected topic. So yeah, today I would like to I'd like to share a kind of an idea I have for an interdisciplinary research project involving domestic magazines and knitting. The idea itself is still quite embryonic, very much in the planning stages at the moment. But what I thought I'd do is I'd share the thoughts that I have so far with you, and then you can ask me any questions, give me feedback, and I really look forward to hearing what you think. Okay, so this is my plan, my grand plan. It's to kind of run a project that will capture older people's memories of knitting and domestic magazines prior to 1960. My idea is to bring participants together in knitting or crafting groups, where they will explore knitting or craft projects from pre-1960 domestic magazines. And my hope is that this activity will prompt them to share memories of pre-1960s knitting and magazine reading practices. So they might talk about their mothers or their grandmothers, for instance. They may even talk about their own experiences. The inspiration for my project comes from a Facebook knit-along that I ran during 2020 as part of an AHRC-funded postdoc. The knit-along aimed to engage wider knitting communities with a collection of domestic magazines, which is owned by the Knitting and Crochet Guild. Now, the Knitting and Crochet Guild is a UK educational charity which is dedicated to hand and domestic machine knitting and crochet, and as well as having members across the country who meet regularly in groups to share their knitting and crochet, to have workshops, to listen to talks. They have this wonderful collection of patterns and other knitting and crochet related materials. So I wanted to kind of share the domestic magazines from this collection. For the knit-along, I invited participants to work on a knitting pattern for a jumper that was published in Women's Weekly magazine during 1923. Well over 100 people joined the Facebook group, and 18 knitters from the UK, the EU and Australia completed the jumper. And I've put a couple of photos on the next slide, so just to give you a little idea of what we did. You can see a picture of the jumper on this slide. You'll see it has camels, pyramids and palm trees around the bottom. And it was evidently inspired by the fairly recent discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb. As a result of this discovery, which was kind of broadcast all over the world in the mass media and in mass newspapers, ancient Egyptian culture became immensely popular. And this jumper is part of that. It allows Women's Weekly readers to kind of sort of participate in the fashions that were coming out of this interest in ancient Egypt. Now, excitingly for me, the process of making the pattern prompted older participants to share memories of their mothers and grandmothers' knitting and magazine reading practices. Someone recalled her grandmother, who'd been born in the 1890s, recalled how she'd been a huge fan of Women's Weekly. She bought it every week, and she told me which bits of her, which her favourite parts of the magazine had been. Apparently she was very keen on the fiction. Someone else posted in the Facebook group some 1930s marketing materials from a particular yarn shop in Clapham, which sadly closed in 1960, but had been a fantastic yarn shop apparently. And someone else put up this beautiful photo of a knitted rabbit, which she'd made using a pattern that her grandmother had used, and it had been printed in 1933. So it was this wonderful. It was wonderful to see the way that this very old pattern was still being used. She'd made the magazine for her baby. So she'd made the rabbit, sorry, for her baby niece who'd been born just a couple of years beforehand. so yeah, it was wonderful, all this sharing of stories about knitting and magazine reading that kind of came from the process of making this Woman's Weekly pattern. And it really delighted me because very little data on these things had been collected at the time. And I know that a lot more of this knowledge exists. Whenever I give public talks about knitting and magazine history, or when I lead historic knitting workshops, I'm often approached by older people with stories to tell. So I would really like to run a project that will kind of formally capture these stories, or some of these stories. Now, such a project, I think, really lends itself to interdisciplinary research. Besides historical knitting and magazine reading, areas of interest include knitting practices in the present. So how does knitting or crafting figure in older people's lives today? Knitting or crafting as the basis of social links between older people. Now, I think this would fit very nicely. Historically, knitting and crafting have actually been communal practices. Think about knitting circles, sewing bees, that kind of thing. And of course, magazines themselves were these wonderful centres of reader communities, not just all the women who bought the magazines, but they also sort of passed them around family members and friends. And so I think it would be really good in the research to kind of develop this theme of community, if possible. There might also be a digital element. So some groups could meet on Zoom, for instance, and a Facebook group could be set up for participants where they could kind of communicate with each other, share ideas, encourage each other, give each other tips, and share photographs of their work in progress, you know, between the group meetings. The project will also engage with the challenge of interdisciplinary research, which is how to kind of formulate activities and write a funding proposal that will meet the aims of both humanities and social science research. And here's my final slide. So yeah, finally, the project could be a fantastic opportunity for public engagement. I'm really keen on public engagement in my research. I think that because, you know, I work with these magazines which were, you know, published for mass audiences, they were read by many people. I think it's really important to carry on engaging people with that, and not to kind of keep it all for you know, academics in our little ivory tower. So I'm very keen on public engagement indeed. Yeah, I think you know, I was just thinking about where participants could be recruited via. So there's obviously the Brunel Older People's Reference Group, or BORG, the University of the Third Age, Age UK, which runs knitting and crafting activities. It has a knitting and crochet patterns on its website, which you can download. Local knitting and crafting groups, and also the Knitting and Crochet Guild itself, which has plenty of older members. The Guild have been very supportive of my research so far, and I'm very sure that this project would go down very well with a lot of their members. And I think I could also approach the Women's Institute as well. I think they could be quite good for recruitment. So yeah, lots and lots of recruitment possibilities for this kind of public engagement project. So there you are. These are the ideas I've had so far for the project. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I look forward to hearing any questions or feedback you have. And if you want to email me, my email address is on the screen. So thank you.
Ellie, thank you. I just think what a great idea to take an activity shared through time and place and bring it back and see how it resonates with people today, and what it means, the meaningful contribution of crafters in their own lives, the lives of their families, and in society as well. It's really a great project. Let me open it up for questions from the group for you, and then we'll have a final questions from everyone for the whole series of presentations. So first for Ellie, any questions? Michael, is this for Ellie or is it for the whole group?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you introduce myself? I'm alumni of Brunel University, a member of court if it still exists. And I well recall attending a Brunel Research Festival some years ago and talking to someone there about the work you were doing on aging and so on. They did ask me if I want to be involved, but I was only early 80s then, and I didn't feel old. I'm now 90 and I have physical problems, so I'm glad to say no significant degree of cognitive impairment. What I wanted to focus on was, and I thought we might hear a bit more about it this morning, is the tradition that Brunel has had of investigating the potential of new technologies to tackle the physical and mental problems of aging. I know that this has been going on for many years and there's been some good developments, but I've argued for a long time that we need to tackle it's all very well enabling people to live to a great age as long as they can be fit and healthy. But there's no point in living another 20 years suffering dementia or agonizing pain or something else. So we really do need to focus very much more on the problems of aging and tackling, finding ways in which we can tackle these various things. I mean, I know when I was chair of Age Concern in Ealing some 15 years ago, we were going on about the fact that while the bus pass for older people was wonderful, it's not much use if you can't actually physically get to the underground. And the vast number of stations then, and sadly some still, are totally inaccessible to anybody who has mobility problems. The last point, I don't want to go on too long, but the last point, and it relates to the last talk we heard, was how we can how more effectively we can use people's memories of things past. I recall that when I was chair of education in Ealing in the 70s, I met a gentleman who was coming to meetings in London. He was in his mid-80s. He lived in the north of England, in Stockport, I think. And he told me that when he was a young boy in the 1890s, he talked to his grandmother, who was also over 90, and she told him about the celebrations they had in London at the Battle of Waterloo, after the Battle of Waterloo. Now, that was two people going back nearly 2 centuries in their memories. And I think there must be potential for investigating a great deal more. Sorry, I won't go on. I'm being a bit too prolific. Sorry.
Michael, you raised a number of great points. And I think, one of the things we want to do here today is to think about how to help resolve problems of aging through these talks and others. But let's hear from let me just open it up for any others that want to express their thoughts as well.
Right.
Number of comments coming into the chat. Is there anyone else that would like to make a final comment or two about what you've heard today? Christina?
I was just reading the comment from Federico about digital technology and was thinking of an answer to the question, which is about its role in supporting healthcare professionals and carers as far as aging is concerned, and thinking, don't really know the answer to that, except to say the things around the digital divide. But just to say, a comment, I think this has been a really interesting session and there's so much we could take from it. And I think it does foreground the social and the psychological sciences in thinking about aging, because there was an interesting article in The Guardian at the weekend, which was, I'm not entirely sure I accept the percentages, but was suggesting that genetics explain 30% of our longevity. And it's the other factors, the social, I'm sorry about my, the social and environmental that explain and our socioeconomic position and factors like that are more powerful than genetics in explaining changes and increases in longevity. So I thought that was just an interesting thing to say. So it's nice that we've had a whole range of different social science perspectives, because particularly thinking about Ellie's thoughts about, well, thinking about all the presenters, which in many ways focus on the quality of our lives rather than the length. So I think that, yeah, that was really interesting. I'll shut up because you're, yeah, you hear too much from me.
Well, I completely agree with you, Christina. I think this was a fascinating array. I love the interdisciplinary potentials and the so many facets of the aging process. And I'm just thinking about the richness of work that's out there being done and that's coming up and what that can mean. I mean, what a great contribution all of you are making. And those of you who are here even listening today to these presentations and taking that knowledge out further, you know, how great is that? That's really what Brunel University is all about, especially doing with their research festival, bringing the knowledge out and doing some of that translation.
And Seb has done a bit of shameless self-promotion for us, because we are having a day's event on the 19th of May in the Hamilton Centre. You can find it on the Research Festival programme. Not only is there a lot of interesting, different research projects being presented. You can take part in a physical, inverted commas, a physical health MOT as well. But there's a free lunch. So what is there not to like about it? We'll hope some of you will be able to come along.
Sounds great, and thanks for that promotion. That's really important. So
I know Ellie will be there, Amy will be there, Joe will be there. I'm sure Dorothy and Hua will be there, but I think Hannah's got another a clash. So the presenters will be there if you want to talk to them some more. I'm sure they'll be delighted.
That's great. So on that note, I want to thank everyone who participated today, the presenters who went to all the work of sharing what you're doing and the currency of your work, and also those who came to listen. It was fantastic morning and fantastic work, and I hope to see you again at future aging events. So thank you all.